Great. Maybe I'll get started so that we have time to get through today. So, thanks everyone for joining our webinar. I'm Nikki Skuse, and I'm the co chair of the BC Mining Law Reform Network, which is a network of a bunch of community based groups, NGOs, and some academics and Indigenous peoples. And we have been working a lot and trying to sort of debunk and also broaden the conversation around critical minerals. And we're seeing a lot of pressure to mine for critical minerals and to increase mining across the country, but also a lot here in British Columbia, and to fast track. And this raises a bunch of important questions around environmental oversight and enforcement, Indigenous rights and consultation and consent, transparency in decision making, and also how communities can meaningfully participate. So we decided to host this webinar to hear from both Melanie Mercier to get an example of a community-based group that has been active recently in a mine that's been proposed in their backyard, and also from Adrian Birchtold from Skeena Wild, who has extensive research and skills in terms of trying to be able to navigate and find a bunch of resources. So hopefully you'll walk away from this webinar with some sort of practical tools and examples of tracking mining projects and engaging with the regulatory process, as well as some community organizing tools. So first, so as part of today, we'll hear from Melanie Mercier. She is one of the founders and directors of Save Record Ridge Action Committee. This is a community-based nonprofit that started in 2023 over concerns of an open pit magnesium mine being proposed in Record Ridge. So we will first hear from her before we turn to Adrian. So Melanie.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity. I will dive right in. So let me take you all to the Roslyn Range. It's in the globally rare inland temperate rainforest, where, are we moving ahead for the slides? And it can go to the next one too. All right. So yeah, let me take you to the Roslyn Range. It's in the globally rare inland temperate rainforests where Record Ridge and its rare high elevation grasslands and old growth forests are. It's in the heart of Roslyn's four-season outdoor mountain destination Mecca, which is anchored by a thriving tourism and recreation economy. And a mining exploration company has been advancing a mine proposal in the area, which is about 7 kilometers from town. Some residents' home would be as close as 3 kilometers from the pit. And we at SRAC have been fighting this project for 3 years now, and we've been demanding the government to follow regulatory integrity and to uphold their environmental safeguards. So far, we've secured an injunction back in March to prevent the company from substantially starting so that we could challenge the government's decision not to require an environmental assessment for the proposed Record Ridge mine. And the hearing on the merits of that judicial review decision was completed at the courts in Roslyn earlier this month. And it's a battle that we co-defended alongside SNIX. The judge indicated that it expects to render a decision by mid-June, so that's coming up. Regardless of the outcome, though, both SRAC and SNIX, we've presented a strong case, and we expect there may be an appeal following the decision, which is also something we're prepared for. And we've also filed a separate judicial review of the decision to issue the Mines Act permit. And that matter is expected to be heard in Nelson, BC in November. And this is totally separate from the environmental assessment judicial review. And it deals with the permitting decision itself. There's other permits as well that are part of the process, and some have been approved since, and some are still pending decisions. That includes the approval of a permit from the Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship to make changes in and about a stream. There's also outstanding permits, including an Environmental Management Act permit for discharge to air and water. Also, there's a forest cutting authorization, transportation approvals related to road access that is still open. But with all that, is the key point is to realize here that a mine permit application and its permitting process is a file with multiple legal and permitting streams. It's not just a mine permit itself. And for Record Ridge, the file involved, like I outlined, like mining, environment, water, transportation, forest, health concern, indigenous consultation issues, and each ministry may only see its own slice. They don't necessarily communicate with each other. And so communities need to track the whole map. Could we change to the next slide, please? And so for Record Ridge, the legal pathway where it wasn't just one single step, it's been a multi-layered strategy. And so building the record through detailed public and technical submissions, using expert evidence to identify gaps, pushing concerns into every active permitting process, seeking access to the Mine Development Review Committee, which I will refer to as the MDRC, filing Freedom of Information requests, which I will refer to as FOI, when information was withheld, and challenging key decisions through judicial review when the province refused to apply the level of scrutiny this project demands. And so our advocacy has meant community organizing, technical review, legal submissions, political engagement, fundraising, events, outreach, interviews, social media, public education, court action, and so much more. All of it done by volunteers, people like you and me, continuously doing a full-time job, but 7 days a week without actually getting paid. And how is that even possible, fair, or sustainable to leave that to community members? Well, it's not, but here we are. And here's the truth. In a system built to favor industry from the roots of colonial times, communities, including Indigenous people, still hold real power when they stand up together for health, for the land, and for the evidence. The lesson is that legal pathways in BC are strongest when community advocacy has already created a serious evidentiary record before the decisions are made. And what I can say too is that what we've learned through this wild ride is that mining decisions are not made in one dramatic yes or no moment. They are built through a chain of process decisions that communities must track, or they lose total visibility into the whole project. And Record Ridge is a prime example that shows how communities need to track everything before a final decision is made. And for this webinar, I don't want this information to seem overwhelming, because if I can do it, if Sra can do it, you can all do it. It's been a learning curve, and we've learned a lot along the way, but it's totally possible. And communities need to understand that how the approval pathway is built, piece by piece, is where public oversight can fall through the cracks. So we will get to that in the next slide. And thank you. So it turns out that mining oversight is quite fragmented. And one ministry looks at, say, the mine plan. Another one looks at discharges. Another one looks at water. And another one may deal with forest, roads, health, or consultation. Each ministry may treat its piece as manageable, but the community experiences the project as a whole. And a key question communities should keep asking is, who is actually assessing the whole project? And what comes to mind is the Mine Development Review Committee, or MDRC. That's often the central place where the technical review happens before a Mines Act permit decision is issued. And ideally, a community should push hard for a seat, an observer role, or at least a chance to present at the MDRC. And framing it as a procedural fairness issue where possible is key. Affected communities need timely information, a meaningful way to understand concerns, and a way to feed issues back into the process. And that's something that SRAC, we've continuously asked for a seat, and we were never granted one. But that's okay. There are not many hard legislative rules governing exactly how the MDRC must operate. And so the Mines Act give the ministry significant discretion in how it runs the process. But that means also that communities should not assume they have a guaranteed pathway in. They need to push for access, use like political channels, work with local governments and indigenous governments to find practical ways to understand what is happening inside the review panel. And so what we've seen is that members from local governments with seats in the MDRC have like such limited capacity to analyze hundreds or thousands of pages of technical material, because guess what? They have full-time jobs, say as with municipality positions and roles, and they don't necessarily have the expertise to review such technical information to begin with. So that's where community groups like SRAC come into play, and we can support from technical volunteers, local knowledge, coming in with lots of energy because we have so much at stake, and also expert contacts. So building that kind of relationship is key if you don't have a seat in. And so next is to find a way into the information flow. If you're outside the flow, you're always reacting late, and that's an issue because that might mean a municipal representative, an indigenous government, a sympathetic elected official, a technical advisor, a formal presentation to the MDRC, or someone who can regularly ask ministry staff what has changed. And it also helps to have like what we call ministry whisperers who can deal constructively with ministry staff. Not everyone should be the hard-edged advocate. You need someone who can call, ask questions, build rapport, and keep information moving. That role matters a lot because it's all useful information and it's not obvious just straight looking at the public record. And there's also some tools within the MDRC that need tracking. One of them is called the Issue Tracker, and it's where ministries, agencies, indigenous governments, local governments, and sometimes community participants raise issues. And then the company will respond, regulators or participant may counter respond, and issues are tracked. But for a project, there may easily be like 100 plus issues. For us, we identified over 200 issues. And this can become a crucial part of the evidentiary record. And it's important for communities to understand which issues have been raised, by who, how the company responded, and how resolved issues were documented based on actual evidence or just assumptions. It turns out that being marked resolved does not mean they were substantially resolved from the community's perspective, hence why we've been in court. a bunch of times now, and will continue to do so. Another tool is called a SharePoint record, which is a shared online document system that's constantly changing. And if communities are outside that system, they may not know what information decision makers are relying on to make the final decisions. Also, what's important is to getting independent mining expertise early on, because experts can help identify what matters in the application, what does not, and what other experts may be needed, or what gaps there are, or that may be. And a good resource for that is an organization called FAME. That's an acronym for Find an Independent Mining Expert. And yeah, that's a wonderful resource. We secured experts from them before. And also, it's important for communities to connect with organizations for support. They don't have to do this alone. And we've received crucial help from West Coast Environmental Law, Western Mining Action Network, Mining Watch Canada, BC Mining Law Reform, WildSite, and other mining law or conservation networks. These organizations can help with strategy, expert referrals, legal framing, funding leads, and understanding the regulatory process. One of the most frustrating lessons is that detailed submissions may appear to be ignored, but even if it's like sent highly specific evidence-based concerns to ministries, they often we wouldn't receive any meaningful answers. But that doesn't mean that the work is wasted, because these submissions build a record, force issues into the process, create accountability, and they may give decision makers pause and become important later on in court. And then in terms of the FOIs, these are essential as well. And they start by asking directly for what you want. Then it's important to tighten the request as much as possible by date range, ministry, project name, permit number, type of record, or sender and recipient names. And the narrower the requests are, the faster and cheaper it is. And in terms of the information in FOIs, it's quite crucial because it can show whether issues raised by the public were actually considered or simply absorbed into the process without meaningful response. Also, communities should engage with ministry staff, but you shouldn't be stopping there. Technical submissions should go to staff, and political letters should be going to ministers, MLAs, and local elected officials. It's important to work with your MLA to request meetings with the political side, and staff may treat concern as technical inputs, but politicians need to understand the public interest, community impact, and democratic accountability issues. And also a couple other things is the permitting will handle it kind of trap. Communities are often told not to worry because issues will be handled later in permitting, but later permitting can become narrower and more technical, and it may focus on mitigation rather than whether the project should have had a fuller review in the first place, say like an environmental assessment. And by then, the big framing decisions may already be made. So stand your ground. And anyone opposing a mine, gravel pit, or similar projects in BC should look closely at the Garnet Valley case, which recently won in court. It's important because it shows that a Mines Act permit can be challenged where the decision maker fails to properly justify the decision, address the core concerns, or ensure meaningful public input. And it's also a useful case study for communities thinking about legal pathways and the importance of building the record. And in closing, for the next slide, so some of the central lessons from Record Ridge is that it's not a narrow legal technicality. It is that a project with serious potential effects near a community recreation assets, sensitive ecosystems, downwind and downstream water effects can move forward through a series of technical and administrative decisions unless communities track the process closely and intervene early. It's also important for communities to ask questions like who has access to the live record? Who is on the MDRC? Is there an issue tracker? Is there a SharePoint? What has been marked resolved? What studies are being relied on? What has been deferred? Also, what ministry is responsible for each issue? What politician has been briefed? What is being assumed rather than proven? Who is assessing the whole project? And to fully close my part here, a mining file is not just the application. It's a whole process involving multiple ministries and permit avenues. It's worth fighting for the places we love, and it's all possible. All it takes is believing that it can be done because it can be done. And don't ever underestimate the power of a small group of residents dedicated to stand up for the truth, for regulatory integrity, and to uphold environmental safeguards. The end of a fight may not always be right in sight as cans of worm keep opening up, but what's better? Saying that you wish that you did something you didn't, or you wish you did something, or that you wish it didn't happen after the fact, or be actively participating to ensure it doesn't happen in the first place. Communities need to stand together to know where the record lives and follow the process tightly each step of the way, or else they are only seeing the surface of decisions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Melanie. Um, there's lots of really important takeaways, and I think it's a really, really inspiring and again, further evidence of just the burden that's put on communities without, public participation funding, even uh, even in an environmental assessment process, but less so fighting to get a project into the environmental assessment process. Encourage everyone, if you have questions, please write them in the chat, or there's also a Q&A button. If it's not on your Zoom bar, you can hit the more button, and then you can find the Q&A button there. But first we'll do a question and answer at the end. We're going to now turn to Adrienne Birchtold, who works on mining reform and salmon habitat conservation at Skeena Wild Conservation Trust. She has a Master's of Science from Simon Fraser University, where she specialized in aquatic ecology. But she's also been extremely integral into helping the BC Mining Law Reform Network with things like our tailings map, and also digging into some projects and helping find information, like when we do the Dirty Dozen report every couple of years. So I will turn it over to Adrienne, who's going to walk us through just a few tools, looking at Red Chris as that example.
Thanks, Nikki. I think, Jamie, actually, I probably don't need the slides at all, but if you want to put the link to the community guide in the chat now, and then if people want to kind of follow along with the links that I'm going through, that might be useful. Yeah, so as Nikki said, have done a bunch of research into specific mining projects in BC, and we put together a list of websites that are publicly available where you can find various aspects of information related to mines in the province. And they're, in that community guide that hopefully there will be a link in the chat for shortly, and has been sent out to the whole mailing list already. And some research that I did in depth was into the Red Chris mines. So I'm just going to share my screen and go through a few examples of these resources using Red Chris as an example. And I'm also going to preface it by saying these sites are most useful for major mines, and accessing the type of information that I'll be describing is certainly, as Melanie already described, much more of a challenge with mines like Record Ridge, where there's debate over whether they even qualify for that level of oversight that a major mine would receive, like an environmental assessment. So, if someone can just give me a thumbs up or let me know that you can see my screen, I will.
Looks great.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, so I'm starting off on this section in the community guide around decision making and where to find information. And so first we're going to go to a site called EPIC, and this is a site that houses information related to projects that are going through or have gone through an environmental assessment. And the links are all embedded in the guide, so I can just, click straight from the guide to open up EPIC. Takes me to this home page, and there's a couple of different ways that you can search for projects. So one feature is they have a map view. If you click on that, it shows the map of the province and all of the sites, or all of the projects, sorry, that are housed on this site. So you could even just kind of look in your region, your neck of the woods, and find out what information is available and what types of projects there are. Many of those will be mines, but there's also plenty of other types of resource projects that undergo environmental assessments that would be included on this map as well. If you want to look for a specific project, you can either type the name up in this search bar, or I'm going to go back to the home page. They also just have a list, which is what I usually use. So click on the list of projects. All of them are listed here, and you can search. I'm going to search for Red Chris. And I get a couple of results. So Red Chris had an initial environmental assessment that was withdrawn from a previous proponent. So that's that lower result. And then the top one is for the active certificate that they received to the current proponent, Newcrest. So I'll click on that. And it takes me to kind of this overview homepage for Red Chris. There's a few different types of information here. You can learn about, the name of the proponent, the status of the mine. So in this case, Red Chris is already post EA decision and is operating. And you can see, when the environmental assessment certificate was issued back in 2005. There's also a featured documents section. So these are like kind of the most recent important documents related to the project associated with its environmental assessment. So in this case, Red Chris is trying to expand, and that requires an amendment to their EA. And so some of these documents are, related to their application for that expansion. Another useful section on this site is under the tab commenting. So when a project is undergoing its environmental assessment or a major amendment like Red Chris is, you can go to the commenting area and find out if there are open public comment periods. So those are opportunities for, members of the public like yourself to engage, provide feedback, concerns, that kind of thing. The most recent one for Red Chris was last year related to their expansion, so that one's already closed. And then there's also this documents tab, which is kind of a housing for any document that has been submitted related to the project's environmental assessment. So it could be from the proponent, Newcrest. There's documents there like assessments that have been written by the Environmental Assessment Office, technical memos from advisory committees, people who know a lot about risks to caribou, water, that kind of thing. And so there's all sorts of kind of conversations and assessments that go on when a project is going through its EA. And all of that information is housed here, including, now information on their amendment application. There's a lot of information there, and you can try to use the keyword to narrow, like the search bar to narrow it down. But as Melanie was talking about, these projects have issues, tracking tables. And if I wanted to find that, for example, and I just put issue tracking, nothing comes up. But if I put issues tracking, I get some results. So it's my point there is that this search function doesn't work very well. And often, if you're looking for something more general, like tailings, for example, you'll get some results, but maybe not everything you want. And so sometimes, unfortunately, you do just kind of have to go through like the whole list of documents that are provided there. Yeah, so that's it for EPIC. And if you then want to, carry on learning about this mine, if it's a mine that has moved into operations, then the first place you would go, again, in the community guide is BC Mine Information, and it's under the heading of Mine Overview and Status. So I'm going to click on that link, go into BC Mine Info. It has a similar kind of setup where you can search by map or by list. I use the list, I just find it a little simpler. And as soon as I start typing Red Chris, it pops up. So I'm going to click in there. And again, this is, a site that gives you information on any major mine in the province. So it doesn't necessarily need to be operating. It could be a mine that's in care and maintenance, one that used to operate and is now closed. So there's, a few options of different types of mines you can learn about here. Again, gives you kind of an overview of the project, some information around what commodities are being mined, how many tailing storage facilities they have, whether it's operating or closed. And then one piece of useful information is that it names the permittee. So that's the name of the company that goes on the operating permits. And that's useful for the later step that we're going to go through when you're looking for permit violations and trying to learn about whether the mine is in or out of compliance with its permits. Some useful tabs on this site are in the Other Documents tab. I find this can sometimes be the most useful place to look. These are kind of where annual reports are submitted about the mine. And one of the most useful is called the Annual Reclamation Report. Those are written every year by the mine or its consultants, and they do discuss reclamation activities on the site, but they also cover a whole bunch of other topics. So they'll talk about how much production occurred, how much waste was produced. They'll talk about any, major changes to the mine plan or the mine operations that occurred that year. And they also discuss like a high level summary of the environmental monitoring and performance. So they'll talk about water quality monitoring, for example, and any issues they might be having with that. So it's a good place to just go to kind of get an idea overall of what is happening at that mine. And if I wanted to access this report, I would just hit the plus sign and then click the link and it would download straight to my computer. Another useful document that is usually under this other tab is the dam safety inspection. So, oops, didn't mean to do that. So again, these are reports that are written every year, and those are specifically about the tailings dams. So they look at, how much construction was done on the dams and how are they performing. They'll talk about water management issues. They'll talk about potential stability issues and go over, how those potential concerns are being addressed. One thing to note about these is that some mines call it something different. So sometimes they won't be called a dam safety inspection. They'll be called a facility performance report. So just keep in mind, you might want to be looking for either one of those titles. Lastly, on BC Mine Info, they also give you the operating permits that the mine has received. So the Mines Act permit, as Melanie was talking about, kind of that governs what the mine is allowed to do within the boundaries of the mine site. And it's usually kept pretty up to date. This is the best place to get Mines Act permits. This one was last updated in December of 2025, and so you could download that from this location and kind of get an idea of what's in the permit. And then there's Environmental Management Act permits, which Melanie also talked about. So that's for the mine's discharges to air and water. Unfortunately, this is not the best place to download those permits from. So just because it doesn't get updated as often for, yeah, the Environmental Management Act permits. So if you wanted to look into, for example, the wastewater discharge allowances for this mine, the best thing to do is actually to like note the permit number, which I've highlighted there. So it's 105017. I'm just gonna Command C, copy that. And then go back to the community guide. And we have here where to find permit information. And right underneath is this authorization management system. So if you click on that, it takes you to a slightly less user-friendly, but still somewhat straightforward kind of database. And you just under authorization number, you're going to put in that permit number that you're interested in, hit search, and it's going to give you the effluent discharge permit for Newcrest Red Chris Mining. And you'll see the date on this one is 2024, whereas the date on the one on BC Mine Info was 2022. So this one has been updated. There's probably been some amendments made. This is where you're going to get the most current information. If you wanted to download that permit, you just hit open and it'll give you the whole permit. These permits are really kind of useful to look at because they detail all of the ways in which the mine is permitted to potentially affect the receiving environment. So they tell you what types of wastewater discharge are allowed, where those discharge locations are, if there are any limits on like contaminant concentrations in the discharge, and then also if there are limits on contaminant concentrations in the receiving environment, say for selenium, for example. And that, so those are the things those are the guardrails that have been placed on these mines that they are supposed to stay within. Of course, we know that oftentimes mines don't. And so the last resource that I'm going to go through today, back to the guide, is it's called the Natural Resource Compliance and Enforcement Database. And that's where you can learn about where mines are out of compliance and have potentially been issued orders to fix those permit violations or have been issued penalties or fines for those violations. So this is the homepage. And I just wanted to note that this covers compliance and enforcement actions by a bunch of different ministries, but it includes Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Mining, and the Environmental Assessment Office. So those are the three main agencies that are, tasked with regulatory oversight of mines. So it's kind of it's one place to find information from all of those agencies related to, in this case, Red Chris. So if you click on Find Records, it takes you to the larger database of all of the compliance and enforcement records. There's 145,000 results. Obviously, we're going to need to narrow that down. And I have found instead of putting the name of the mine, I just find the search results are better if you put the permittee name. So I'm going to put Red Chris and search for the results that way. And so now I've got 134 records related to Red Chris. Many of these are inspection records that don't have any documents associated with them. So you can get a little bit of information about like who did the inspection, what was it related to, but you don't get any information on the results. However, if you kind of look for results that have an attachment, those can be a bit more interesting. So in this case, this was an inspection done by Ministry of Environment. You can see that it was related to that wastewater discharge permit number. And in the outcome description, it tells you the mine was out of compliance and it was recommended for a penalty. And if I were to click on this link, that will give me kind of an extensive summary of the inspection that was done. And it will show you which components of the mine's permit it was out of compliance with. And so you kind of get a sense of where are they following the rules and where are they not. Even more kind of informative potentially if you just want to see, okay, like has actual enforcement taken place related to permit violations? You could go into the search filters and pick the type of result you want just to be those administrative penalties. And then it gives me, okay, Red Chris has received 5 penalties. If I click on that, again, it shows me who issued it, tells me the permit that it was related to. Again, this one is related to their effluent discharge permit, shows me the amount that they were fined, $12,685. And then there's a couple of records. So it'll give me information on what the specific violations were, what the number, like dollar number of fine that was associated with each one of those violations. And then in the final determination, I'll be able to see like what the reasoning was for the final dollar amount. Sometimes it's exactly what it should have been, but sometimes the company will have been given an opportunity to appeal and that fine will have been reduced. And so you can kind of get a little bit of information into the decision making that happened there, the arguments that were presented by the company, and the rationale on the decision maker's part as to why they have chosen to enforce the rules in the way they have. Yeah, and I think that's about it. There's tons more of resources in the guide, but not enough time to go through them all today. So hopefully that's helpful. And yeah, we also have time for questions. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. That was super helpful. And I learned a lot. And also, I don't know if folks, it looks like Jamie found the correct link, but we developed a community resources guide, the BC Mining Law Reform Network, both to provide some potential kind of debunking or questions to ask when communities are faced increasingly with pressure to have a critical mineral mine open in their backyard. And it sort of provides that overview of decision-making process, some key regulatory points, and then a bunch of these resources that Adrienne accessed plus more. So helps to be able to figure out as Melanie said, everyone, it's a lot of learning when, in particular from community-based volunteers, of how to do this and to navigate these systems. So hopefully this community resource is a helpful tool for folks. And we're also open to questions. So I don't know if people have any in the chat or the Q&A. I'll first ask Melanie, maybe what was this mine presented to you guys as a critical mineral mine? Was that one of the community pressure points?
Definitely. And also not only that, but that it's a very small project. It's out of sight, so it's out of mind. It was presented as being like way farther away from the community and not mentioning its location with respect to this International Mountain Biking Association epic bike trail that brings people from all over the world yearly to our resort community. And also that it's critical minerals and the way to access them is a green process, and also a lot more like Roslyn is a mining town and it was based on mining. And a quote that we like to share that Niels came up with is, well, Roslyn might have been a mining town a century ago, but so like Victoria was a whaling town. And then what?
Right. Amazing. Adrienne, maybe we can pin you to get you here too, but there's a question about whether you think compliance issues exist for most mines or certain companies associated with more infractions and or more serious infractions.
Um, Yeah, I mean, I do think there are companies that do a better job than others. Often that might, I mean, sometimes I think it's related to, the just the executive management and like the kind of ethos of the company. Some I think are genuinely trying more than others to do a good job. Sometimes it just has to do with resources, like the bigger companies have more money to put towards things like environmental monitoring and mitigations. And so there can be a bit of a trade-off there, where, yeah, if you just have more money, then you can afford to kind of be in compliance, I suppose. Um, but the other thing I would say is that sometimes when, and I didn't have time to get into this in the presentation, but sometimes when mines are out of compliance, it doesn't always necessarily mean that they are polluting a downstream creek. Like sometimes it has to do with, oh, they missed some required sampling because conditions were bad, and they weren't able to access a particular monitoring location. And so you do kind of have to like look into it a little bit if you want to kind of have a fair assessment of how the company and the site is performing. It can sometimes be useful to not just take, oh, it's out of compliance at face value, and kind of look into like what actually was that violation, and also, is it repeated? Like, is it something that's been going on for years and years and they've been told they're out of compliance multiple times and have done nothing about, because that indicates, a lack of effort or kind of care on their part to really resolve the issues.
Yeah, and I've noticed that that's happened a bunch for more like that administrative penalty too. I think you sometimes have to look at that. Is it just that they're not putting forward their plan by the deadline or whatever versus being out of compliance in terms of actually polluting the environment? But that's helpful. And for both of you, like, so, it is quite a maze of trying to navigate information and find these things. Is it possible, like, Adrian, I've noted when I've done this, like, so when you click, sometimes you get the downloaded PDF. So, like, that search function seems a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could probably rant for the rest of our question and answer period about all the kind of finicky ways that these resources don't work as well as they could, and aren't super user friendly. But yeah, there are, like I was kind of showing with the search function, like they're just not very modern, I suppose, or I don't really know why they don't work as well as they should, but they don't. And another major issue is that, there are so many different places to go for this information. And even, the fact that I had to take you to BC Mine Information to get the permit number, to then go to the authorization management system to put the permit number in to get the most up-to-date permit, like it's a rigmarole, and I've been doing this for 8 years and still feel confused sometimes about where to find the right information. And so, yeah, it's a huge challenge, especially for, folks who are volunteers or community members that just are curious or concerned, and to try and navigate those hurdles is, yeah, it sucks.
Yeah,
Really
thanks. And
knows.
Melanie, I don't know if you have comments too about that, like both um, I remember hearing from the proposal in Wells, for example, there's this sort of challenge finding information and then but also a deluge of information. Like, it's like these reports with thousands of pages or whatever. So I don't know if you
Well, something that came to mind actually, going back to the Mine Development Review Committee and an experience that we've run into multiple times with the mines information portal, is that documents might be uploaded on there, and then you click on it, and not only like maybe it doesn't go to the right link, or the document wasn't like uploaded properly. And
Yeah.
so, why I'm going back to mentioning the Mine Development Review Committee is asking and making sure to know who the chair of the Mine Development Review Committee for your project is, and who also is the chief permitting officer on the file. And so having direct communications with them to hold them accountable and keep track of, sometimes it takes like 5 emails because they kind of half answer what you're asking them, or like, oh, we'll get my assistant looking into this. And sometimes too, like documents are not uploaded at all. And then all of a sudden, like months later, after they were issued, get uploaded. So it's like constantly monitoring these portals like watchdogs, it's very key. I just wanted to mention that one of our directors signed in as well, and I see there's a hand raised. So is it okay to
Yeah, absolutely. I was
introduce
confused
him?
why this other Melanie had her hand up, but
Yeah, I'm not
Melanie
sure
sent
what
me a
my
link.
name is, but I thought, I don't know if it's okay if
yeah,
Niels wanted.
absolutely.
Niels French is another one of the STRAC directors, and him and I have been talking every day for the last 3 years, and we're part of this team. And there's one more main directors on the project.
Yeah, and it was actually me that raised the hand there because I was going to say exactly what Mel said about the files being corrupted, and I was kind of wondering, geez, this hasn't come up yet on this call. Maybe it was me. And I went to the Record Ridge page and I tried to pull up, it was a permit enclosed letter, and it downloads and then it fails to load. And there have been many times when I went to try and get permits and other documents for other mines, to compare or to get an idea of what we're going to see. And I find that over and over again. So I'd be very curious to know if others have run into that and if they've found a way to fix it. And I want to add to what Melanie was saying about, in addition to kind of what she mentioned, when you're going through the Mine Development Review Committee process, yes, there are certain parts of the application and various appendices and annexes that are going to be posted on the mines.nrs website. But that's only a fraction of what's really there. So there are often queries will come up from regulators, and consultants for the company will produce additional reports, and those won't be published, or versions will be modified and changed and adjusted, and those will be typically, I think, shared on a SharePoint page that people on the Mine Development Review Committee have access to, or maybe sent around to people with a limited distribution. But it looks like you have everything on the Mines website, and it looks great, and it looks transparent because there's all these appendices. But that might not be the latest version. There might be response memorandums to specific questions that have come from regulators. There might be additional versions. And even when a permit is issued, we have found that you got to keep a close eye because they'll issue an amendment to a permit, and they'll change the appendices and documents and reports that the permit is referring back to. And we've seen an access route change. There's lots that can go on, and it requires keeping a really, really close eye. And on the compliance question, I do want to kind of add one thing that we definitely noticed, and I don't know that I don't know that we included it in or that Mel included it in the details for the presentation, but the joint application information requirements, which you would think are requirements, they are in no way hard requirements. I'm sure a lot of people on here may have run into this already, and we have been told straight up, face to face, by the chief permitting officer that no mine ever meets all the joint application requirements, and these can sometimes be, and I'm not just talking things that the company was never required to do in the first place. I'm talking about things that they were supposed to have done, but maybe a 24-month test that they only had 17 months of data, or maybe they need monthly averages for meteorological data, but they've only provided annual. We've seen stuff like this get completely overlooked. So the joint application information requirements, which you think would be complied with, are basically never complied with.
Yeah, wow. That's it, and yeah, and a lot of information to follow and to have to check, and then
Hmm.
raise, I guess, and push back on. And I know that both of you have experience doing freedom of information requests. Melanie, you talked a little bit about it, like ensuring, sort of having dates or key things to sort of try to get the best information back. I don't know if either of you have any other insights or to when you feel like you need to go to a freedom of information request versus.
Um, so I'll say a few things here on this, and
And we
again,
only
because
have a
I
couple
covered,
minutes, and then we're probably going to
yeah,
lose. What is it?
freedom of information requests can sometimes take a very long time. So I would say put that in early, and they certainly are useful. I don't think at all that you're getting the full spectrum of what is available. I mean, we asked for years of material, and it came back from the Ministry of Mines with basically no email messages. Um, and we knew that there were email messages because email messages between mines and environment came back in the environment FOI request. And we pushed back and said, what's going on? And they just said, sorry, there is nothing. So, but at the same time, there can be thousands of pages, and there is, I would say, almost always something that's useful, but it can take a long time.
Yeah.
And there can also be some fees, and you can negotiate down the fees. So in the minutes we have, there's a couple tidbits.
Right. Thanks. Adriana, last minute. Last.
Just a quick thing on that. I mean, if people are going to submit an FOI request, it's important to know that the people managing FOI requests and filling them are not experts on the subject that you are interested. So they're not individuals working in the mining industry. They are working in a separate ministry that is responsible for freedom of information. And so it's useful to know in terms of framing your search terms, like the things that you want them to look for and then return to you, because they don't have the technical knowledge to know probably anything really that about what you're looking for.
Right. Thanks. Well, thank you so much. Round of applause to you guys. And please, for those who were able to join, use the community resource. Feel free to reach out to us at the BC Mining Law Reform Network. You can send one to info at reformbc.ca. And we are, happy to help sort of support and give tidbits and ask any other outstanding questions to Mel or Adrienne to get some responses to you. And great question about the role of guardians. I think that's something that we should see more of in terms of that compliance, that on the ground compliance and enforcement, ideally. And to the person who asked about, there's so much to deal with in British Columbia that we really are a network that focuses on the province, but there are some related pushbacks that sometimes we do federally also. So I think those were all the questions. So thanks everyone for attending, and thanks so much to Mel and Adrienne and Niels for joining, and Jamie and Mining Watch for helping with the tech.